morning, and welcome to United Black Association for Development Educational Foundation, UEF, third annual Belizean Garifuna Ourstories. I'm Sister YaYa Marin Coleman, the spokesperson for UEF, and the producer and host of these series. I take deep breaths because we guess not joining me yet. The guest for today is our sister Ifashina Ifonuyemi, and she's a Garifuna woman, writer, lecturer, advocate, and she confirmed that she would join us, but and asked Tikla for starting on time. So I'm not prepared for have one reasoning for a whole hour by myself. We're give thanks we have our own media house. We're broadcasting on XTV TV channel locally, and you could go to XTV Belize on YouTube or XTV Belize on Facebook. The cow for sure for African ancestresses and ancestors for guide me through this process. And if anybody has joined me. And last week I never close out and make them know that they come and go back and confirm if they may want or stay if they want. So that one error on my part. Let me share why UEF start this series. I identify as on spirit having an African woman experience. And for me, natural for one know what we're African people in the region. We could always keep in mind that African descendants, specialized as Black people, had a glorious history with struggles and victories before our people were kidnapped and human trafficked across the Atlantic Ocean and other parts of what they call the Americas. So we do need to spend time on that as well. But right now, especially with UEF, with community support, leading the process in recognizing African Emancipation Day on August 1st, 2014, and then in 2021, the state made it a public and bank holiday. Within that context, we look for African people. Now, we know that the Belize, the majority are African descendants racialized as Black people, that groups were identified as Creole and Garifuna. Based on how I raised, they say I come from one Garifuna, not Garifuna, from one Creole bloodline. I know some people question me in the past because I have one Spanish last name, Marin, and I definitely identify as Black. So people, a number of times ask me if I Garifuna, and I said no. My mother from Davis Bank, River Valley area. My grandpa on my past side, I say one Spanish man, and that's where the name Marin come from. And my pa look more like for him pa than my Black granny and for him Black ma. Anyways, so I know a lot about. We grew up in a family where we know for we family members, at least 2 generations back. So as I do, I have one thirst for knowledge of self, African people, racialized as Black people, starting Belize and then expanding outwards globally. So as I did the research and learned about African descendants racialized as Black people, I find out knowledge about Garifuna people. I'm always sensitive to telling other people's stories, was my original mindset because I don't identify as a Garifuna person. And give credit to Garifuna people, out of the 2, at least as far as the research I do, out of the 2 Black groups that Belize, Garifuna and Creole, the Garifuna people do the most publication of telling for their stories, as far as books, journals, articles, newspaper interviews, online conversations, debates, more so than the Creole people. So at least I could, and then of course if you have the time and the skills, you could go to archives, do inter-archive loan, all that. So, doing the research, I find African people because Garifuna people are identifiable African people. Again, I'm hesitant to have the conversation because I feel that people should have the space to tell their own stories. Then I recognize that that's part of my own colonized mindset because these are African people. They're not my people. For we people. So I have a right to go find out about my people. So 3 years ago, UEF started this series in the month of November, usually 3 or 4 Saturdays. We'd have 1 hour Zoom community conversations. We'd have one guest reason with the guest for half an hour. And then the next half hour, the other people then will join the Zoom. If they choose to, could participate in the Zoom. So that's the backstory why I know identify as Garifuna, but I did the research on Garifuna people's stories. I really hope everything okay with my sister because it's not, I know her to be a professional person. So I'm surprised that, join me and I hear from her and we confirm that it won't be the guest today. And I really look forward to the conversation because she'll be where I understand will be second generation in a leadership with the National Garifuna Council, which is an organization where sign an agreement with the government of Belize to talk on behalf of Garifuna people. Now remember I never expect that I want even to lead this conversation or to center myself in this conversation. So you don't have to bear with me while I stay as calm as I could and in a real time pull research knowledge that I find over a period of time. No, they never tell me I could call their name, so I'm not call their name. But I got one sister and one brother. One would identify Garifuna, one would identify Creole. Where agree, brainstorm with me, I had it up for hours. I mean, 2, 3 in the morning. I research all day, all night. And I get excited and then I need somebody for some board the knowledge I have. So give thanks to there's some other people too, but they're two that I mean to where I could text their voice notes, I could share podcasts with them, I could take pictures of articles, send links to them when they wake up. One of them, she that talked to me 2, 3 in the morning, and I really appreciate. And the sister where some board with have one child will live at St. Vincent. So, and she got to St. Vincent up and down. So she that have knowledge about St. Vincent in a way where I would have. And she that says some things to me and then I'm like, okay, make I go research that. So I'm really excited about the support system where I have and I'm appreciative of them people where, they want community effort. And I might see my face and hear my voice, but know so that this they want community effort for find out about African descendants racialized as Black people in Belize. So as I said earlier, my preference that we have evidence-based conversation and know that new information, different interpretation, that one process. So I know attached to anything that when new information or different interpretation presented to me that I don't want nothing to do with it. One of the first books where I get, I don't know if I get never prepared for the sit down here. I really hope other people would have joined and talk for an hour. But let me do it, and this time I call in, so I want to do it. The book, one of the first books where I use as a source when it comes to Garifuna people is called The Garifuna, A Nation Across Borders, Essays in Social Anthropology, edited by Joseph O. Palacio. So I said earlier that I'm really look forward to this conversation with Sister Ifashina as what I consider one second generation of Garifuna people leading NGC. And a number of people never know this, right? So I tell you that the book, and that's why I cite my sources, because people have a right to go check and see if That's true. No, no accept no not tell no cause I tell no. Do your own research, think for yourself, ask the questions. So chapter 9 in that book, that a patrimonial activation and construction of Garifuna identity in contemporary Belize, Gabriel Izard, that page 176. But on page 182, it talks about the NGC. And so I know I read a whole lot because I know some people prefer not for hear the reading. But one of the paragraphs say, in talking about the NGC, the last objective demonstrates how the NGC has sought consensus with the government, avoiding division or conflict in order to achieve its goals. With this aim, a Memorandum of Understanding was signed in 1999 as a basis for dialogue and negotiation. In this document, the government recognized the NGC as a legitimate representative of the Garifuna people in Belize and agreed to consult the organization on all matters concerning the Garifuna community, as well as adopting an inclusion policy for them in national development. For its part, the NGC agreed to promote respect for the cultural diversity of the country. Note that in 1999, so that would have been under a People's United Party administration. I said more than once. And if any other group of people have a memorandum of understanding with any administration, past or current, for be the voice of one group of people that believes. I don't know. I definitely say, based on track record, if anybody for talk for African descendants racialized as black people, it would be Zinc Fence. Because United Black Association for Development, first a cultural organization, then a political party, 1969 to 1974, a Mandela newspaper had evidence of that 55 years, and that was United Black Association. So that means Garifuna and Creole people mean that the original founding membership. So let us make one note of that. Why I'm going to look forward to having this conversation with Sister Ifashina. This book, and I have one tendency, I don't read book from cover to cover. I jump all over the place. I definitely read it from cover to cover. So one of the exciting things about this book is, in order to learn about our people, we have to keep in mind at all times that most of the documentation on African indigenous people will be from the perspective, position of primarily European, racialized as white, men or males, and maybe some women. So you have diaries, government reports, church record, personal letters, newspapers, one bunch of places, and you could get from archives or sometimes from personal collections. And you have different perspectives. Now, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So, and I know Sister Ifashina is a well-trained, knowledgeable, identifies as an African, as a Garifuna woman. And this may be one different level of conversation where I know I can have with she because of her knowledge. And there are a lot of Garifuna women I engage with where I could have second reason panel levels there. So one of the Mekatelano right now, I strongly recommend that you listen to one podcast by Sister Fiona Compton. She's from, I think, St. Lucia. The podcast is called Know Your Caribbean. And one of the things where got me, like I go sleep all night with the Have a She voice for the past few nights, is that she go and research. Now, I know here I mentioned, it briefly mentioned Belizean Garifuna people, but I don't really hear I go into one of the top about Know Your Caribbean. I don't think it really focused on Belize, whether upon the mainland, and Guyana, whether upon the mainland. It did touch Suriname, but what exciting about the research was she do, and she's a Caribbean historian, and it a very, very good storyteller. Like one of my sisters said, it got a voice for it. it really make you feel like you're in at the moment, and you feel all kind of feelings, because of course, some of the things that we find about our African people are very hurtful and could be traumatizing just listening to it. And so one of the things that excite me about what she do is that I did hear about indigenous people in a way where I never hear about them before. And so that exciting for me. So Know Your Caribbean by Fiona Compton. I recommend and listen to them podcast over and over, because you have to listen to it more than one time. Now, in listening to her podcast, she made mention of a Jesuit priest named Pierre Labat. Pierre Labat. Now, until I hear she say the name, then I'm like, wait a minute. I see a Labat name come up more than once when I read. And one of the things I never recognize, acknowledge, is how involved both the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church were in the enslavement of African people. Front and center. Anglican and Catholic Church. And so in looking at, and I really have value for root stories. And root stories meaning you go at the root to find out what happened. So from past conversations we've had, our first person we had for this series was our brother Jerry Enriquez. And then last week we had our sister Renee Nunes. And so from the past conversations we've had, and being open to we don't know everything, that it's safe to say that African descendants, racialized as Black people, in the 1600s, if I'm not mistaken, kidnapped from the continent of Africa in enslavement status on an enslavement vessel, mutinied for the British enslavers, ran the vessel aground at St. Vincent. And then you had free and enslaved African descendants, racialized as Black people, from other Caribbean countries, under St. Vincent. And that will be the beginning of the Garifuna people story as African people. So I never know, and most of them know the story of the indigenous people who made their pan their lands before the Africans then come. Before Columbus come in 1492. And they made it there for thousands of years. So in the podcast New York Caribbean, you get more details about that. But anyways, for bringing back to this Jesuit priest Pierre Labat, in the book we are just telling about, it said how the purpose of this book that introduced two previously ignored French voices, because a lot of the conversation, we being English speakers, would have come from the Jesuit Pierre Labat. And I have one short selection of writing were available since 1931 in English. Now make a see if I could send this to Christy, because I really believe strongly that it helps when people could actually see one visual. Where is it? There's a book that I try as best for. I prefer having the books in hand, because I like write up in the book now as I read them. So I will send this link to Christy right now, who is the MCO in XTV, and ask now for bring up the book. So when I could see this particular book, I can't wait to get my hands on it. It's called The Memoirs of Pierre Labat, 1693 to 1705. Now, the way I come across this book, that because in the notes of the podcast, the sister Fiona Compton cite what part she get the knowledge from, what she is sharing on this podcast. And then I found that they have one, because sometimes they have selected sections of one book as an ebook online, and then they have that for this book, but they don't have the things that I have one interest in. So, anyways, I share the link with one of my brothers where Thank you, Christy. We have knowledge about Garifuna people. And the brother say, he want other one, and he want other one for me. Well, I want to hear me lose my mind. Like, that will get me excited. Now, a book what I want to read, what I never know about, where I teach me about African people. I depend eat all the time with that. Anyways, in order for this sister come, because I'm 10:23 now. So the point is, somebody tell me that they try, and I appreciate the community trying to. I hope the sister okay. Somebody tell me that how then try reach the sister through FB for making know that with a wait panel, and it seemed that it disconnected from Messenger and FB. So I just hope sister Ifashina, if we know any, is well. Stop call up in here and let follow now. Because the 7:23. So again, quite a bit of what we know about Garifuna people that found that Catholic priest. The book go on to say, for keep in mind that that priest arriving at the region 200 years after European colonization, we don't do a whole lot of wrong thing to the wording what they use it at the Carib culture and life ways. And he himself may have brief contact with the surviving Carib communities. Now, this book focused on the voice, two French voices, because again, for we colonizers are never French, so we never have, because people have different perspective. The French and the British fight over St. Vincent. So this particular, the two French voices where this book focus on specifically, that is somebody name, and I know how to butcher the people name. Emmanuel Francois Marquis de Lamberté, 1719 to 1814, and he number from Perigord. So that are one of the voices in this particular book. The second voice was a writer, Alexander Moray de Jones, 1778 to 1870. So this they gave one different perspective where art and time here. All right, we'll park that for now. I don't know if I have the book nearby. No, I don't have the book nearby. Okay, but what I want to do, I want to send this to Christy because give thanks I got, like I tell you now, I send information to my sister and brother when I find things when I'm up all hours the night. So what I want to do, I want to send to Christy. This way I send to my sister. I read it to her. She don't know if I like read, but you read it. I proud of her, sis. I know the call her name. Can I give me permission for call her name, sis? I send this to Christy. So even though I don't have the book nearby, because I never expected I want to do so much talking, I want to still tell her no. Where that this book? No, that other book that I need right now. What I'm looking at, there's an article in it's called "In Cultural Survival" is the name of the where is it? Cultural Survival, and in that book, in the I just going from my phone. Okay, so it's Cultural Survival, and this is the Caribs of Dominica, land rights and ethnic consciousness. We had to try to do that. I hope I'm not confusing that gives some root lines about indigenous people. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the storyline where I hear from Garifuna people is that there were indigenous people in St. Vincent. My understanding, and that is source where I'm going to look for just now, and maybe it is what I sent, that I had sent to my sister, where they talk about the, where they give you the timeline of indigenous people Okay, it'll take time because I wasn't prepared to do this. But anyways, to the best of my knowledge, there were Arawak people in what's known as the Lesser Antilles, which are the smaller islands in the Eastern Caribbean. Let me see if I have a picture. No, I don't have a picture of that. Of the smaller islands in the Eastern Caribbean and the Greater Antilles, if I'm not mistaken, like Jamaica, Cuba, those are the bigger islands. And they have something to do with how the breeze blow as well, windward and leeward. Anyways, so there's some indigenous people in the Lesser Antilles for like 1,000 years. And then some other indigenous people come from the South American region where identify as we just want to say one other group of indigenous people came. Those indigenous people from South America went to the Lesser Antilles and met the Arawak people. I see it in the book, but I don't remember which one in the book I have it in. Then two people link up and the indigenous set will come from South America and the indigenous set will be done by the Lesser Antilles. From out of that set come the Kalinago people, which there were another set of indigenous people. Then Kalinago people, who the European referred to as the Red Caribs, right? And then you had the African people who came, met with the Kalinago people on the island. Again, I stand to be corrected. I could just show the sources that I get this information from, and then we could go from there. Now, what I find of interest, and one of the things that get me excited last night, is that I don't know how things could right in front of your face and you don't see it. So remember now, we have indigenous people, Kalinago, or I think they spoke the Karen language, and anyways, so this now get me excited last night, and I think is of interest. One of the things where the book is called Towards Understanding Belize's Multicultural History and Identity by Joseph Ernest Ondofa-Eo. Christy, I could show it if I get a chance. And when you look on page 75, I know I read everything. Right? I want to make sure that the book, and I want to make sure to see the paragraph where they talk about specifically. Again, I know I don't want to read everything, but I want to pick up on the part where underline will say, while this view, and the view, what did it talk about? Make I just go from the top. It said, the third strand actually is a jumble of variants. However, the emphasis is on Garifuna indigenousness in America and hence their Indian ancestry. So that's the conversation or the focus right here. Garifuna people, indigenousness. Thanks, Christy. Because Garifuna identifies indigenous and African. They're definitely identifiably African. So it's this view supports total assimilation and absorption of the Africans into the Carib and the Arawak through a process of miscegenation. So what that to say is that when African people, Ghana, St. Vincent, that then totally get mixed in with those two indigenous groups. Remember, I tell you, the Arawak, they were there first, like 1,000 years before the Kalinago people, before one indigenous group, Ghana, St. Vincent, and when then two groups mix, then you have the Kalinago. They're original people. And that Garifuna people, the indigenous people to America, is based on the indigenous ancestry, and that if you accept that, they totally get the wording is assimilated and absorbed of the Africans into the Carib and the Arawak. It also alludes to the fact that the Garifuna culture, as we see it today, is an Indian one. And then they say that this that we give them an indigenousness. This view totally rejects slave experience for the Garifuna and extols the view that a ship carrying slaves had been wrecked on these shores and the blacks set free in this manner mixed with the ancient inhabitants. So at least the different positions, let's just share one, that this position of Garifuna indigenousness is rejecting the African experience. While this view is very popular among the Garifuna of Belize, evidence does not support this theory. Laborde, for example, informs us of the near extermination of the Amerindian Carib, as he declares, quote, "They are no longer to be feared, so many have been destroyed," end quote. Whereas formerly they occupied 20 to 30 islands, they are now to be found in only 2 or 3. So this source to say that the indigenous people used to have a lot of them. They made like 20 to 30 islands. Now they only depend 2 or 3. So I don't know the time frame for this, but so that they're not like they don't have a lot of indigenous people. It go on. He concludes that, and it says something in a French. I don't know what you mean. Anyway, you get to the end now, right? It's at the last sentence, which the part where just, I'm like, oh, I never think about this before. Thus, it may be true that the Garifuna assimilated and absorbed the Amerindian Carib rather than the other way around. So, he said that Garifuna people, they said that they have the indigenous identity because they absorb that from the indigenous people. But he said the evidence doesn't show that. It couldn't ever be that like African people lose their identity or a sizable portion of it because they had children, married, had the values, the practices of the indigenous people, while Garifuna people could not claim their indigeneity. And he said that because it couldn't ever be because the population of indigenous people may small compared to the amount of African descendants, black people. And then this, the last sentence will get me, I'm like, oh, I never think of that. It say, and this may explain why the Garifuna today appear to be more African in phenotype than the typical Sambo mixture of Amerindian and African. And I'm like, that make all the sense. When you look upon Garifuna people, I know in a contemporary times they mix with other groups of people. Got that. But for the time period where we're talking about, we're still identifiably African people. So illogical to me that the mixture with the indigenous people, where the Garifuna people claim the how they get an indigeneity, for me, until I see evidence was otherwise, is questionable just based on how Garifuna people look. Now, I know this is a sensitive conversation, and I know people are in on their feelings, and I don't have one right for be. I'm open to having the conversation. This is a part of who we story as African descendants and people who identify as Belizean nationals. Because usually, so for example, do I have this other one nearby? I never think I'm going, yeah. There's another, and I've had this person on Sunday Review before, because I know I like evidence-based conversation. Where is it? And there's a scholar, there's a scholar who did some research on indigenous people in Belize. Where this thing that went here wanted. And he had looked at these indigenous people, what would I talk about specifically, are the ones from the Mosquito Shore. And they had give thanks African ancestors, I find it. And this at the point where I had a make, right? So around Christmas 1821, I think that like 95 people approached the then British superintendent of Belize, who was at the time Colonel George Arthur, for petition for their freedom. Now that because I don't have my dates because, well, I never expect on to this right now, but the population of Belize changed significantly. I think it was in the 1700s after Britain and the Spaniards signed one treaty for make the Spaniards take control of the Mosquito Shore, and then one group of people from the Mosquito Shore came to Belize, including enslavers and enslaved people, would drastically change the population of Belize. And in that group of people, there were, I think, over 1,000 enslaved Africans. Now, to be in an enslavement status based on European process, you have to look like one African person. So the people that would come from the Mosquito Shore, mixed with African and indigenous, then call someone a Sambo. That because you could look upon it, and you could tell they have indigenousness in it, but you could also look upon it and tell they mixed with black. And because of that, they and their forebears were in an enslavement status. So to give one example, then call them Sambo, where you could look upon people and could tell they mixed with indigenous and African. So the indigenous people from the, and this is from the person where this particular article where I share from, and I could send this over to Christy as well. And Christy, I really appreciate you winging it with me, sis, and sharing this knowledge with people. The person who did this particular research, his name is Nathaniel Millett. He's been on Sunday Review twice, very detailed about the research where he do. And that I find out more for the first time about indigenous people. So one of the things where he said, because they have different groups of indigenous people. So he said, for the distinction between Tawira and Sambo mosquitoes, see the excellent work, okay, not that, they have one space where, all right, it said Tawira mosquito, this is on page 688, Tawira mosquitoes concentrated in the south and identifying as indigenous descended, and Sambo mosquitoes identifying as Afro-Indigenous and based primarily in the north, wielded much geopolitical and economic power across the Mosquito Shore and Central America. This are the I'm so thankful our African ancestors and ancestors just helped me out. This are the information I'm going to look for earlier. In accordance with the 1786 Convention of London, the Spanish took control of the Mosquito Shore in 1787, resulting in the evacuation of 2,214 people in Belize, of whom nearly 1,700 were enslaved, including many of the petitioners or some of their forebearers. Now, these people petitioned for their freedom because they said, based on European criteria will make you enslaved, African, that they should not be enslaved because they have indigenous ancestry. They lose the case, but then they get their freedom because then they're able to prove, and this will make this a big deal for this region, that then they're able to build one family tree through primarily oral history, for sure that they come from indigenous ancestry, and then so they should not have been in enslavement status, even though they look upon it because they mix with African bloodline. So I've gone through all that to say, for sure we're a mixture of indigenous and African people may look like, and they're still enslaved, eh? And then thanks Christiana, they could see it though, because the friend smile. And then for give the example of Garifuna people were mixed with indigenous people. So I said, for true, how come the Garifuna people say no? You know, it's a no mixture for that time period, at least not what I see here, and then based on the research. So that was, one source, right, where I showed up for Aondo EO. Then I come back to the book where I tell about the Garifuna nation across borders, we look from the perspective of the French voices, what we don't usually hear, well, because we that are, we colonizers that never, the French. And in this book, I wouldn't send this to Chris because, well, I never know I'll have this conversation. But on page 33, and this one be, no, a lot, but this particular one where I read from, one be the account at the first French voice, which would be the French voice of Marquis de Lamberty, I know how to pronounce the name wrong. History of the Caribs, a savage nation living on the Windward Islands of America and part of the mainland. But this one of the things where I not read everything, but one of the things where he say, in the early days of European settlement in the Antilles, on a ship coming from Guinea full of blacks for the cultivation of the colonies, the slaves revolted and threw all the whites into the sea after killing them. But as they didn't know how to navigate, they were forced to let the ship drift in the currents. The trade winds, which are prevalently easterly throughout the year between the tropics, quite naturally led the slave vessel to the first land in the most windward part of northern America. The island of St. Vincent was the first that the blacks saw. Make I just end up and read the thing at 10:44. Naturally, wherever the ship ended, they would run it aground so as not to drown. As might be imagined, they all hurried ashore to look for signs of life. The Red Caribs, American natives who occupied the island, received them with their usual humanness and showed them a side of the island previously uninhabited where they could establish themselves. The blacks, more hardworking, more content, and less inclined to destroy each other, as well as naturally cleverer, developed their small colony, while the Reds were destroying and diminishing theirs. The blacks sought to merit the protection of the Europeans who occupied the neighboring islands. More supple and pliant than the Reds, they were soon considered by the whites as an instrument to play a larger part in the plan that had been formed to force the Red Caribs to entirely abandon possession of their islands. The blacks were supported and even covertly encouraged in the first quarrels between the Reds and blacks, which took place soon after the two nations had agreed to share the same island. Almost done. The Black Caribs named themselves a sovereign chief to govern them in despotic fashion. Remember that European French enslaver to write this. They never wanted to submit themselves to the Red Cacique, while the latter, indifferent to the vanities of this world, hardly bothered to impose themselves. This is the point where I'm going to get to, but I want to give you some context. Over time, the blacks' colony has grown to the point where there are now more than 20,000 of them just on St. Vincent, even though there were no more than about 200 when they arrived, as opposed to the 3,000 or 4,000 red savages at the most. The latter realized their mistake, but too late. They wanted to chase the blacks away, but these took the right measures to render their rivals' plan futile and have had themselves recognized by the Governor General of the Windward Islands on behalf of the King of France under the name of Black Caribs, as the free inhabitants and possessors of the leeward part of the island of St. Vincent, whose principal settlement they called it Le Managaro. It's the last one. All right, I'll finish this paragraph right now. So as to distinguish themselves from other enslaved or free blacks, of whom there are a number in the Antilles, they practice the flattening of their infants' foreheads in imitation of the Red Caribs. It's almost the strongest of their divisions that I met with on the island on St. Vincent and in the Windward Islands as a whole, where I made the acquaintance of this, the word is spelled Tourouia, I don't know how to pronounce it, sovereigns cacique of the savage Black Caribs, a title passed from father to son since their arrival in America. That's the last sentence. I was received very honorably in his Carbet, where he owns excellent and abundant lands, worked by around 100 black slaves, which he brought in our colonies, and who are not his subjects, but are regarded by him and other nations as free and independent. The slaves do not have flattened foreheads. Remember now, this is from Garifuna, A Nation Across Borders, Essays in Social Anthropology, Joseph O. Palacio edited that. So that the two sources cite already where the question is being raised. If indeed, and you have to look at time period, who to tell the story, check and see where they get their sources from, that the Garifuna people claim indigenousness based on their mixture with indigenous people. But the question come up for me, from what I see so far, two sources, that there were more African people than indigenous people. Based on war, based on European diseases. So they had less indigenous people than they have African. And that's why when you look for that time period, and the people who then settled in Garifuna people, they look primarily like African, because the African are African, they have the majority of their offsprings, and not majority African and indigenous. But there's evidence that says as a word, that's why I look forward to the conversation. At 10:48, make I also go back this source. I sent it to Christy. This is from Cultural Survival. It says 13 to the 3rd, Central America and the Caribbean, March 2nd, 2010. The Caribs of Dominica, Land Rights and Ethnic Consciousness. Now, this is one of the things where surprised the heck out of me, because this is not a storyline where I hear the Garifuna people, I say. The storyline where I hear the Garifuna people, I say, the ancestors and ancestresses come from South America, Ghana, St. Vincent, war with the French and the British, lost, get exiled to Baliso, lot of people dead, get exiled to Roatan, lot of people dead, populate the coast of what we know as Central America, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Belize. That is the storyline I know. Now, listen to this. This paragraph. Christian, did I send you? I think I sent you the Cultural Survival, I'm not sure. But this is a history of the Caribs. It was through the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748 that Britain and France settled on control of the Lesser Antilles due to the formidable resistance mounted by their inhabitants. Dominica and St. Vincent were left as neutral islands for the sole benefit of the Caribs. Right? So Dominica and St. Vincent, neutral, no colonial rule, no under. This treaty was violated first by the French and later by the British. The latter obtained possession in 1783, driving the Caribs from the calm Caribbean coast to the mountains and hostile Atlantic coast of both islands. I'm a think I sent it to Christy, but I never sent it to Christy. Make I send it to Christy now. Thanks, Christy. And then it goes on. This is the part where I never know this first time, and a lot of things I don't know. A lot of people might know it, but I just say I never know. I will have to pay attention to the dates. In 1797, 5,080 Caribs, the majority of St. Vincent's population, so even though then the Caribs, we know them to be Garifuna people, were forcibly removed from the island by British troops and banished forever to Roatan Island off the coast of the Republic of Honduras. We know that. The Garifunas of Belize are their direct descendants today. We may know that. No, this the why I never know. Mind that when you look on Garifuna people of that period or we read, they never look like one mixture and indigenous and African. This is the part where I never think about. And I never hear this yet. The few Caribs who remain, we as a Garifuna, on St. Vincent, I never know there were Garifuna people left behind in St. Vincent. No. Maybe come and send me tell you because you hear that Garifuna people go to St. Vincent for go look for them people. But I just said, but I never know that people left there. Anyways, the few Caribs who remain on St. Vincent's Garifuna were allocated 233 acres by the British government for their subsistence. Me never know that they may get lands given to them. I just say I never know. And because one of my sister, like I told you earlier, have people, that are married to somebody from St. Vincent, I could find the thing now. Oh, okay. She told me that they have one island where the Garifuna people are known to be in St. Vincent. It's in the northern part of St. Vincent called OWIA. OWIA. She just passed through the place one time, very impoverished. And then I gone and I Google OWIA, where I want village, the St. Vincent, just to say where one pop up. And what pop up is, it tells you that there is such a place. This according to Wikipedia, that they do have that space, and that it says Owiwa is a town in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It is located on the northeast of the main island of St. Vincent. I send that image to Christy. Close to the nation's northernmost point, Porter Point. There was some other point I want to make before we go. And I can't remember what the point exactly. But just to go over quickly, because we guests never show up today, after I confirm that they may come, that the conversations you have to lead, and we welcome to talk with reasonable people. If you're not reasonable, I don't want to talk to you. We hear that reasonable being, and we get passionate and excited and loud sometimes, like I do, to say, I know this position, but I want park one position where I know. Let me put it to the side and be totally present and hear something different that may conflict with what I hold to be true. But I will still listen to it. I don't judge it. I don't attack the person where to bring the knowledge. I may need time for process. I may even take part in the conversation right away. I might need time to process it, think about it, then come back to it. Or if you're cutting at the present moment, come back to it and say, you know what? I never hear that before. Your site sources where I want to verify. Or I may hear that, but I never understand that the way it means. It's my interpretation. That they're reasonable. And I know you tell me that I'm always an unreasonable person. I 58 years. I had to grow, I had to learn and relearn, I had to learn about emotional intelligence. I had to work on my own trauma and harm. I had to heal, because to the extent where I heal, that the extent where I could share and engage other people. I don't have to like you, but your credibility do matter to me. You being a reasonable person do matter to me. And the whole intention is to learn who we are as African descendants, racialized as Black people. So the process there's one other book. And I think I'm sending this to Christy before, and I'm sure it's called Garifuna Continuity in Land, Barranca Settlement. There you go, Christy. 1862 to 2000, some of the most recent source where I get. Joseph O. Palasa, Carlson J. Tuttle, and Judith R. Lam. And I know that done 10:57 already. I need to drink the water. In this book, chapter 2, page 13, Garifuna Nation exiled from St. Vincent and reconstituted in Central America. At no point in this narrative is there anything about Garifuna people being left in St. Vincent. It said from 1622, so then give one time period. I'm thinking 1622, that the time period when the enslaved African vessel ran aground the St. Vincent. But the time frame they gave is from 1622, about 174 years. The Garifuna Nation underwent a series of displacements within St. Vincent. They waged a war in retaliation for British invasion of their lands, and then participated in a second war against the British that the French instigated. They were finally banished to Belizean in October of 1796, and then exiled in March of 1797, arriving in April 1797 to the coast of Honduras in Central America. You know, he had not noticed about anybody left the Belizean. This chapter begins by telling the story of conflict, loss, and genocide. It goes on to address the questions of nation building. How did the Garifuna survive such a tremendous loss? What did they bring along to help them reconstitute their nationhood after arrival in Central America? What reception did the Garifuna receive in Central America? What combined forces rendered the Garifuna landless first in Hispanic Central America and subsequently in Belize? How and where were communities formed in Belize? Just for the record, I want to give another time frame of what's known as the Carib Wars. 1772 to 1773, the first Carib War. 1779 to 1783. Sorry, the second Carib War was March 1795 to October 1796. Make I tell you that one more time. The first Carib War, 1772 to 1773. The second Carib War, March 1795 to October 1796. I have to give credit to African ancestresses and ancestors to stay with me especially through this process, and I thank you. I always thank you for guiding me, for protecting me, for strengthening me. Even when I feel uncertain sometimes, so I thank you for the one that will come today. If you don't want to go back, you could go back. If you don't want to stay, you could stay. I just want to acknowledge you and tell you thanks. I want to thank the Belizean people who support me consistently, whether I know or not, book me on the road. I tell the Belizean people, I tell you the most, especially Black people, the most affirming things when I meet me out the road. And yesterday was one such day. And definitely want to thank the people in the behind zinc fence. I don't know if the security guard that's Shane Flowers, or if that's Solomon Harvey, or if that's Lord Lewis, the one of them. Definitely want to thank the Master Chief Operator, Christy Flowers. This one repeat. What time I repeat, Christy? Text me, Lord Lewis. Respect what a Lord security booth, security guard. 5:30 today. XTV local channel, this conversation, or well, not really a conversation, I mean, to share, Christy to support the images. And also you could go to XTV YouTube page, and you could go to XTV Facebook page for this conversation. I'm open to talking with reasonable people, and that's why I encourage evidence-based conversations. Remember to go check out Know Your Caribbean by Fiona Compton. It's a podcast, really inspiring, knowledge-packed. Thanks, Belizean people. Oh, shucks. Next Saturday from 10 to 11 will be the fourth and final UBAT Educational Foundation, UEF, community conversations by Zoom being broadcasted on XTV as relates to Garifuna Ourstories. Our guest will be Garifuna educator and musician, restaurateur. Him and his partner own Garifuna Flavors restaurant in Chicago. His name is Rodel Castillo. That'll be next Saturday morning from 10 to 11. Of course, in our summit tomorrow, Sunday review, 10:30 to noon. Heights a conversation, decolonizing conversation with the director of ISCR niche and the senior research education officer, Giovanni Pinella. That's tomorrow morning, Sunday, from 10:30 to noon. Until next Saturday, honor the people and save the people.